Henry VIII, King of England, from 1509 to 1547, is perhaps one of the most famous monarchs in history. He's been played by everyone from Alec Guinness to Woody Allen, with more than 30 actors portraying him on film, television, or stage. And at least 5 women have played the role as well. One can safely say that people have long been fascinated by this larger-than-life historical figure. In today's video, we're going to find out who Henry VIII really was, what he did, and why he's so famous. So if you're ready to get those brain cows milked, then let's get to it. Henry VIII came to power in 1509 at the age of 17 after the death of his father, Henry VII. Henry Jr. was the second son of Henry Sr. and Elizabeth of York, the last Plantagenet monarch. His older brother Arthur had been first in line to the throne, but he died at the age of 15, likely of tuberculosis. At the time, it was believed that Arthur's bride, Catherine of Aragon, had poisoned him, perhaps because she didn't want to marry someone so young. It wasn't until centuries later that historians discovered there was no poison in Arthur's body. You see, when your family jewels are being passed down before you've had a chance to kick the bucket, you can end up with some pretty hefty baggage. Catherine of Aragon brought just such baggage to her marriage with Arthur, namely a dowry. The Spanish princess had come to England in 1501 to wed Arthur, bringing with her a hefty sum of 200,000 gold crowns, the modern equivalent of approximately $6.5 million. This money went towards building and furnishing the magnificent Hampton Court Palace, where Henry VIII would spend much of his youth. But once Arthur kicked the bucket, Catherine found herself without a husband and without a home. She was forced to live with her father-in-law, Henry VII, and her only prospect for marriage was Henry's other son, the aforementioned Henry VIII. Now, while their father saw the advantages of marrying his 2 children as a way to keep the family jewels in the family, there was one problem, namely that Henry VIII was already promised to another. You see, when Arthur died, Henry VII went back on his word and gave Henry VIII's hand in marriage to Spain's Princess Joanna. But Henry VIII wasn't having it, proclaiming, "I am not a bastard, nor will I be a bastard, nor shall my posterity be bastards." In the end, Henry VII backed down, allowing his now adult son to wed Catherine instead. The couple married in 1509, shortly before Henry VII's death, and the newly crowned Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon made their first home together at the Palace of Greenwich. Over the next 24 years, they had 6 children, though only one daughter survived infancy. Mary Tudor, born in 1516, was seen as a legitimate heir, but she was overshadowed by her father's desire for a male child. In fact, during her childhood, Henry even had doubts about whether Mary, born after her mother had reached the age of 35, was actually his. He had his advisors openly speculate about her parentage and treated her horribly. Mary became the first of Henry VIII's children to turn against him, renouncing her royal title and becoming a Roman Catholic nun. This brings us to Anne Boleyn, a young woman who entered the royal court as a teenager and quickly caught the eye of the king. Henry's infatuation with Anne caused him to break from the Roman Catholic Church and establish the Church of England with himself as its head. This was done in part so that he could annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, and in 1533 their marriage was officially dissolved. 2 months later, Anne Boleyn gave birth to a son, the future King Edward VI, but tragically, the child was stillborn. Just over a year later, Anne was charged with adultery and beheaded. Her daughter, the future Queen Elizabeth I, was declared illegitimate and sent away from court. At this point, Henry's 4th wife, Jane Seymour, finally bore him a male heir in 1537, and the king doted on his son, the future King Edward VI, until his death in 1536. Following Jane's death, Henry married one of his courtiers, Anne of Cleves. The two had met when Henry was visiting northern Europe in 1539, and the king was smitten with her looks. Unfortunately, when Anne arrived at his court, the king was less than impressed. 6 months later, the couple was secretly divorced. It was then that Henry met Catherine Howard, one of Anne of Cleves's ladies-in-waiting, and he married her shortly after their divorce. Catherine was just 17 years old when she wed the 52-year-old king, and she soon tired of his advances. Like Anne Boleyn, Catherine was accused of adultery and beheaded. Finally, at the age of 55, Henry VIII married Catherine Parr, who outlived the king and served as regent during the brief reign of his son, Edward VI. So you may be wondering, considering that Henry had 6 wives, how did he find time to accomplish anything else? Well, he certainly kept himself busy. Henry VIII was a Renaissance man. He was educated in both theology and the classics and spoke several languages, including French, Italian, and Latin. He earned the nickname Two-Footed Harry because of his prowess at soccer. And in his youth, he was an avid hunter, enjoying hawking, hunting with dogs, and even bear baiting. Later in life, though, an injury to his knee put an end to his physical activities. He also liked to eat and drink, managing to consume 10,000 gallons of wine each year. But Henry VIII was also a gifted musician, playing the lute, guitar, harp, and keyboard. He composed more than 40 songs and was an accomplished dancer. As an artist, he drew and painted portraits, some of which are still around today. He was also a writer, authoring several books, including The Mirror for Magistrates, which chronicled the reigns of England's first 26 kings from William the Conqueror up until his own father. Another notable work was The Necessary Doctrine and Egregious Heretics Displayed, which attacked Martin Luther. And as a theologian, he wrote extensively about the new religion he'd founded, the Church of England. But probably the thing Henry VIII is most famous for is his dissolution of the monasteries. When he came to power, England had around 2,200 monasteries, which were essentially self-sufficient communities of monks and nuns who lived according to religious orders and followed a schedule set forth by the church. Life in the monasteries was hard, but many saw it as a calling and willingly chose the austere lifestyle. Under Henry's rule, however, the monasteries were targeted and dissolved. By the end of his reign, 600 monasteries had been closed, 85,000 acres of land had been seized, and 6,500 acres of land had been purchased by the crown. The process was overseen by Thomas Cromwell, a former monk who had risen in the ranks to become one of Henry's chief advisors. Together, Henry and Cromwell stripped the monasteries of their wealth, confiscated their land, and gave it to loyal supporters, and broke up the monasteries themselves. While the reasons given for the dissolution were varied, from a desire to stamp out immorality to a need for funds for his wars in Europe, the real reason was quite simple: greed. When all was said and done, Henry VIII had outlived 3 of his children: Mary, Queen of France, Elizabeth, who was raised in Protestantism, and Edward, who was raised in Catholicism. Fortunately for the realm, he left behind no surviving legitimate male heirs, and the throne passed to his distant cousin, Lady Jane Grey. Today, Henry VIII remains one of England's most famous monarchs. His wives and children have also captured the public imagination, and his life has been depicted in everything from operas to sitcoms, including a cartoon series called The 6 Wives of Henry VIII. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. And as always, thanks for watching.